Sometimes, the people we love the most are the very ones who hurt us the deepest. I gave up everything to raise my son, believing that one day he'd look at me with pride, but instead, he chose to bury me beneath shame and silence. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's a journey through heartbreak, resilience, and unexpected power. Grab your seat and get ready. You won't forget this one. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? My name is Mary Thompson. I'm years old, and I live alone in a quiet 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Houston. The walls are thin, the kitchen tiles are cracked, and the heater makes a strange knocking sound in the winter. But it's mine, and for a long time, I thought that was enough. I raised my son, Daniel, here. Well, mostly. He spent his early years following me from house to house, watching me scrub toilets and polish floors in homes that looked like palaces compared to our modest place. I never had much, but I always had him. Or at least, I thought I did. I worked as a house cleaner for over 30 years, woke up before sunrise, packed my lunch in old containers, and caught the first bus downtown. I cleaned marble countertops I'd never afford, wiped down stainless steel appliances worth more than my rent, and watched the children of my employers grow up in luxury, while my son wore hand-me-downs from church donations. Daniel was smart, so bright, in fact, that I always believed he was destined for something bigger. I pushed him to study, to read, to work hard. I took double shifts to save for his college fund. When he got accepted into a university out of state, I cried for days, not because he was leaving, but because I felt I had done something right. But something changed in him during those college years. He stopped calling as often. When I visited, he never introduced me to his friends. At first, I thought he was just busy. Then I started noticing the hesitation in his voice when I mentioned where I worked. The pause before he said, "My mom cleans houses." That pause told me everything. Still, I held on to hope. Daniel eventually moved back to Houston, but not to my neighborhood. He rented a sleek apartment downtown, far from my modest life. Our visits grew fewer, conversations shorter, and then, one afternoon, over lukewarm coffee in a cafe I couldn't pronounce the name of, he told me he was getting married. Her name was Emily. Beautiful, educated, well-connected. Her family came from old money, generations of oil and real estate wealth. He showed me a picture of them together, his arm around her waist, her laugh caught mid-air, both dressed like they belonged on a magazine cover. "You must be so happy," I said, forcing a smile, my voice catching in my throat. "I am," he nodded, eyes flicking away. "But, Mom, I need to ask you for something." I thought it would be help with planning, or maybe even advice, something small, something motherly. Instead, he leaned in and said, "I need you to buy the wedding rings." I blinked. "What?" "My accounts are all tied up right now with some transfers and... Look, I'll pay you back. It's just temporary." He spoke so fast, so rehearsed. I knew that tone. It was the voice he used when he wanted something but didn't want to ask. The same voice he used as a child when he broke a window or lost his lunch money. "I don't have much, Daniel," I reminded him gently. "I know," he said, not looking at me. "But it would mean a lot. It's a symbol, right? A symbol." That's what he called it. I laughed softly, bitterly. I wanted to say no. I should have, but I didn't. A week later, I sold the gold bracelet my late husband gave me on our 10th anniversary. I emptied the emergency jar I kept above the fridge, the one I hadn't touched in years. And when that still wasn't enough, I pawned my mother's locket, the only piece of her I had left. It wasn't fancy, but it meant something, or it used to. With the money, I bought a beautiful pair of rings, simple, elegant, timeless. I imagined Emily's face when she saw them. I imagined her thanking me, hugging me, welcoming me into her life. I imagined being part of something, for once. When I asked if I could meet Emily before the wedding, Daniel hesitated. "She's really busy," he mumbled. "I don't need a long meeting," I said. "Just a hello. I want to see the woman my son is marrying." He gave me a thin smile. "I'll see what I can do." And just like that, I became a background character in my own son's life. Still, I held on to hope. Because that's what mothers do. We hold on, even when everything is slipping away. And deep inside, I had no idea just how invisible I was about to become. It was a Saturday morning when Daniel called again. His tone was upbeat, almost rehearsed, like he was trying too hard to sound excited. "Mom," he said, "the rehearsal dinner's next weekend, Emily's parents are hosting it at their country club. I thought maybe you could come by, just for a bit." I felt a flutter in my chest. Was this it? Was I finally going to meet her? "I'd love to," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Thank you, Daniel." He paused for a beat too long. "Just one thing. Don't feel like you have to dress up or anything. It's casual." My heart sank a little, but I didn't let it show. "I'll look nice," I assured him. "Nothing fancy." The week crawled by. I pressed my only good blouse, the one I saved for church or the rare job interview. I shined my black flats with a damp rag and picked up a box of cookies from the bakery down the street. Something to bring, something to show I cared. When I arrived at the country club, my nerves nearly buckled me. The valet looked me up and down before taking my keys, and I could tell by the way he handled my old car that it didn't belong there. But I held my head high. Inside, it was like stepping into a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers, polished floors, waiters with white gloves. Laughter echoed off the walls. People sipped champagne and nibbled on hors d'oeuvres I couldn't even name. And there he was, my son, standing tall in a tailored navy suit, laughing with a group of well-dressed strangers. He looked like he belonged, like he'd never known anything outside that world. He saw me. His smile faltered just a little before he stepped toward me. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "glad you made it." Before I could respond, a woman approached, blonde, elegant, with a dress that probably cost more than my rent. "Emily." She smiled politely at me. I opened my mouth to introduce myself, to say how lovely she looked, how happy I was for them. But before I could speak, Daniel said, "Emily, this is Mary. She's an old family friend." My words died in my throat. Family friend. Not my mother. Not the woman who raised him, who worked her fingers raw so he could have a better life. Just a friend. Emily smiled and nodded. "It's so nice to meet you, Mary. Thank you for coming." I forced a smile, my hands clenching the cookie box behind my back. "It's lovely to meet you too, dear." For the next hour, I stood in the corner of that shining room, pretending I belonged, pretending I wasn't bleeding inside. No one spoke to me. I sipped water from a flimsy glass and watched as my son beamed at a life I was no longer a part of. He never looked my way again. I left before dessert. No one noticed. When I got home, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the box of cookies, still untouched. I thought of the ring box in my drawer, the one with the wedding bands I'd spent nearly everything I had to buy. He didn't even introduce me. I wasn't his mother that night. I was a ghost in a room full of laughter. I was the past he buried. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something shift deep inside me. Not just pain, not just heartbreak. Resolve. The night after the rehearsal dinner, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the fridge in the next room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He called me a friend. A friend. I kept replaying that moment in my head. How quick he was, how easily the words slipped from his mouth. There wasn't a stutter, not even a flicker of guilt in his eyes, like he'd been preparing for it, like he knew all along that I would be nothing more than a prop, tucked away in a corner, while he lived the life he'd always wanted. That morning, I stood in my tiny kitchen holding the wedding rings. They were beautiful. I had chosen them carefully, knowing they'd be the symbol of a new chapter for Daniel and his wife. And now, every time I looked at them, I felt sick. Still, a part of me tried to make peace. Maybe he panicked, I told myself. Maybe he was just nervous. But when I called him the next day to talk, just to talk, he didn't answer. I left a message, but he never returned it. Then came the wedding day. I waited by the phone, hoping he would call and say, "Mom, come. I made a mistake. I want you there." But the phone stayed silent, just like he wanted me to be. The rings sat in a small velvet box on my coffee table. I picked them up and stared at them. My reflection distorted in the gold surface. These rings didn't belong to him anymore, not after what he did, so I put them in my purse and left the house. Not to go to the wedding, I knew I wasn't welcome there, but just to walk, to clear my head. My feet carried me without direction, block after block, through old neighborhoods and empty sidewalks. The weight in my chest grew heavier with each step. I passed the bus stop where Daniel and I used to wait when he was in grade school. He'd hold my hand and ask why we didn't have a car like the other kids. I always told him, "Because we're saving for your future." I passed the old bakery where I once bought him a chocolate cupcake after his first A on a math test. He hugged me so tight that day, said I was the best mom in the world. Where did that boy go? By the time I got back home, the sun was setting. I stood in my doorway for a long moment before walking inside. That's when I saw the metal lockbox in the back of my closet, the one I hadn't opened in years. It held all the important things: old tax forms, birth certificates, my husband's military discharge papers. I don't know what made me pull it out that night. Maybe I just needed to feel connected to someone who truly loved me. Maybe I needed to feel like I still mattered to someone. When I opened the box, the musty scent of paper and time greeted me. I sifted through the documents, my fingers shaking slightly. That's when I found it, an envelope tucked beneath the last page of our mortgage contract. It was addressed to me, in my husband's handwriting. I hadn't seen that writing in decades. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. Inside was a letter, a short one, and several crisp folded documents, stock certificates, dozens of them. At first I didn't understand, but then I saw the names: tech companies, energy firms, companies that didn't mean much 20 years ago, but were household names now. My heart pounded as I typed the serial numbers into a stock value checker online. One by one, they loaded. And with each number, each new total, my hands began to tremble harder. I wasn't just holding paper. I was holding a small fortune. I couldn't breathe. I sat back, clutching the edge of the table, the numbers swimming in front of my eyes. He had left this for me, quietly, without ceremony. My late husband, who never had more than a few bills in his wallet, had invested everything he had in a future he might never see. And now, that future had arrived. I was no longer poor. I was wealthy. And nobody knew. For so long, I had believed I was nothing more than a tired old cleaning lady, scraping by with barely enough to survive. But in one night, everything changed. Daniel thought he could erase me, that he could hide the parts of his life he didn't want the world to see. But he didn't know who he was trying to bury. Because buried things don't disappear. Sometimes they come back stronger. And this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. I didn't sleep that night. The adrenaline coursing through my veins made it impossible. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea, the letter from my husband in one hand, and the printed values of the stock certificates spread out in front of me like a map to a new life. He never told me. All those years, he must have squirreled away bits and pieces of his paycheck. We didn't have much, but he was smart, quiet, thoughtful, and always thinking of the future. I used to joke that he'd hide money inside the walls if I let him. Now it didn't feel like a joke anymore. What stunned me more than the money was the care he had taken, the details. He had signed the certificates, filed the paperwork properly, and left behind instructions for how to claim them, including the name of a financial advisor he'd once trusted. He must have done this right before he died. It was like he knew I would need a way out someday. And maybe, just maybe, he knew that the person who'd need it most was the woman who'd give up everything for a son who'd forget her. I spent the next 2 days in a daze going through the process. I contacted the advisor listed in the documents. Surprisingly, he still worked in Houston. After verifying my identity and the paperwork, his tone changed. Respectful, curious, slightly stunned. It was the first time in years someone looked at me like I was worth listening to. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, after the numbers were tallied, "you might want to sit down." I laughed, though it came out more as a gasp. "I already am." He slid a paper across the table, neatly printed with a series of amounts. "This isn't just retirement money. This could change your life." It had already changed everything. I walked out of that office in a fog, but one thing was crystal clear in my mind. I didn't owe anyone silence anymore, especially not Daniel. I had spent nearly 6 decades being humble, patient, forgiving. I endured things no mother should endure, being erased, disrespected, minimized. And even when I had nothing, I gave everything. But now I had a choice, and I chose dignity. The wedding was the next day. I stood in front of my mirror that morning, the box with the ring sitting unopened on my dresser. I wore a simple black dress. No makeup, my hair pulled back neatly. I didn't cry, not anymore. I held the rings for a long moment. Gold, clean, flawless, a perfect symbol of something broken. I put them back in the box and zipped them into my purse. But not for delivery. I wasn't going to the wedding. I wasn't going to watch my son lie with his smile while pretending I didn't exist. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of ignoring me to my face. Instead, I opened my laptop. I created a folder. Inside, I dropped screenshots, dozens of them. Messages over the years where Daniel belittled me. Moments when he dismissed my love, laughed at my work, talked about hiding his background from Emily and her family. One message stood out. I just can't let her meet my mom. She's, not really someone you show off. I stared at that line until it blurred. Not really someone you show off. I wasn't ashamed anymore. I had scrubbed marble floors and cleaned strangers' toilets for decades. I had raised a boy into a man. I had given everything I had, and now I was the one with power, with legacy, with proof that I was never small. Late that night, I sealed the velvet box with the rings inside, placed the folder of screenshots on a flash drive, and wrapped it all in tissue paper. I wrote a note, short, firm, honest. To the woman marrying my son, caution. Some men bury their past, others just pretend it never existed, but truth always finds a way to rise. Mary. I didn't sign it as Mom. That title had been erased long before I was ready to give it up. The next morning, I mailed the package directly to Emily's apartment. Overnight delivery, no return address. And then I sat back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't cleaning up someone else's mess. I was finally, quietly, letting someone see the truth. Daniel thought I'd stay in the background, that I'd always be the invisible mother, quietly supportive, endlessly forgiving. But what he forgot is that people only stay invisible when they don't know their worth. And now, I knew exactly who I was. The sun had barely risen when I stepped outside and placed the small padded envelope into the mailbox. There was something final about it, the soft click as the door shut, the quiet hum of the world still asleep. I stood there for a long moment, staring down the empty street, feeling the sharp edge of the morning air on my face. It was done. Inside that package was everything. The rings I had paid for with the last of my savings, the truth my son had buried, and the dignity I had finally reclaimed. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear, focused. A part of me mourned the idea of the wedding, of the family I'd hoped to join, the warm image of a celebration where I was seen, loved, wanted. But that image had never existed. It had only ever lived in my mind. That morning, I didn't put on a dress. I didn't do my hair. I stayed home. I made coffee. I sat on the couch. I waited. The phone didn't ring. There was no text, no apology, no last-minute invitation, nothing. And I didn't need it. For so long, I had held on to the hope that Daniel would come around, that he'd outgrow his embarrassment, his pride, his hunger to be accepted by people who had never known struggle. But he didn't. He leaned into it, built a life that didn't include me. Not really. Not unless it was convenient. I watched the clock as the wedding hour approached. 11 o'clock. Noon. 1. At some point, I walked into my bedroom, opened the drawer where I'd hidden the financial papers, and picked up the phone. It was time. I called the financial advisor again, this time to begin the process of transferring the stock into my name and liquidating a portion of it. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want luxury cars or a new wardrobe. I wanted security, power in silence, a way to rebuild a life on my own terms. The advisor, Mr. Gaines, was efficient, respectful. He guided me through everything, transferring the holdings, setting up accounts, assigning a lawyer to finalize the estate, matters my husband had left behind. "You'll want someone to manage this for you, Mary," he said gently. "It's a lot to carry alone." I paused. "I've carried bigger things alone," I told him, and we both laughed softly. When the wedding day ended and the world moved on, I did too. That night, I cooked myself dinner, not because I was hungry, but because I wanted to. A steak, roasted vegetables, a glass of wine. I sat at my little table, the one Daniel used to do homework on, and I lit a candle. Not for romance, not for anyone else, just for me, for the woman who had finally stepped out of the shadows. That evening, I pulled a notebook from the drawer and began to write a list, not of revenge, not of punishments, but of possibilities, ideas, projects, things I'd always wanted to do but never dared because there was never enough time, never enough money, never enough me. Now, I had all three, and in the quiet that followed, I realized something. Daniel might have erased me from his story, but I was just beginning to write mine. It arrived 2 days after the wedding. A small, neatly wrapped box left at the front desk of Emily's upscale apartment building. No return address, no note of celebration, just her name, printed cleanly on the label, as if the package itself had been waiting for this exact moment. Emily opened it alone. Daniel was at work, or so he'd said that morning. She sat at the kitchen island, sipping her matcha latte, still in her robe, scrolling through emails. When she saw the package, she assumed it was a belated gift from one of the guests, or maybe a vendor. But when she lifted the lid, her hand froze. Inside were the wedding rings, the ones Daniel had shown her in a hurry, claiming they'd been ordered by his assistant. Now, resting in their original velvet case, they gleamed under the kitchen lights. But it wasn't just the rings that caught her attention. There was a flash drive and a folded note. She unfolded the paper and read the words slowly. Caution. Some men bury their past, others just pretend it never existed. But truth always finds a way to rise. Mary. She blinked. Once, twice. The name hit her like a slap. Mary. The name Daniel had barely mentioned. A friend of the family, he'd said. A woman who'd helped raise him. Someone from his past. She plugged the flash drive into her laptop with hesitant hands. At first, nothing happened. Then, a folder popped open. Truth. Inside, dozens of screenshots, texts, emails, snippets of conversations between Daniel and others, some from years ago, some more recent, but they all had one thing in common: me, or rather, Daniel trying to erase me. My mom's great, just not really the kind of woman you bring to a place like this. I just don't think Emily would understand. She's used to a different kind of lifestyle. Mary? She's like family, but not actually, more like someone who helped out. She cleaned houses, for God's sake. You think Emily's parents would be okay with that? Emily scrolled through the messages, her face pale, her breathing quickened. Then came the photos. Me at the rehearsal dinner, standing awkwardly in the background, holding the cookie box like it was a lifeline. No one beside me, no one acknowledging me, just a woman pushed aside. The room grew quiet. Emily closed the laptop and sat perfectly still for a full minute. Her eyes didn't move. Her lips didn't twitch. Something inside her shifted, cracked. She didn't call Daniel right away. Instead, she got dressed, tied her hair back into a loose ponytail, and left the apartment. She didn't even take her phone. She walked 3 blocks, then 6, until she found herself in a quiet neighborhood she didn't recognize, standing in front of a modest brick building, the kind of place where people lived real lives. She stood there for a moment, uncertain, until an elderly man on a bench nearby looked up. "You looking for Mary?" he asked, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Emily blinked. Yes. How did you know?" He smiled softly. "She's the only one folks come looking for around here." He pointed to the door on the 2nd floor. Emily climbed the stairs, unsure of what she'd say, or even why she was there. But something inside her needed to see, needed to know. She knocked once, then twice. I opened the door in a simple blouse and slacks, no makeup, my hair tied back. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then she spoke. "You're not a friend of the family." I didn't respond. "You're his mother," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was quiet, like she was putting a puzzle together she didn't know had missing pieces. "Yes," I said, calm, clear. Emily stepped inside. We sat at my kitchen table. I made tea. She didn't ask for it, but she drank every drop. She asked questions, and I answered them. About the jobs I worked, the years I struggled, the things I gave up. I told her I bought the rings with what little I had, that I stood at her rehearsal dinner as a stranger, that I was proud of my son once. By the end, there were tears in her eyes. Not from guilt, from knowing, from realizing the truth behind the man she married. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I reached across the table, touched her hand. "Don't be," I said. "You didn't know. But I do now," she said. "And I won't forget." She stood up, then turned back. "I'm going to fix this. And if you'll let me, I want to help you too." I watched her leave, her shoulders straighter than when she'd arrived. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew something had changed. Finally, someone saw me. And this time, they wouldn't forget. It was evening when Daniel came home, loosened his tie, and dropped his keys onto the granite countertop like he did every day. He didn't notice the silence at first. Emily often worked late, but tonight, something felt different. The lights were dimmed. The apartment was spotless. And on the kitchen island, right where his laptop usually sat, was the small velvet box. He paused. The rings. He frowned, reached for them, and noticed the flash drive lying next to the box. And then he saw the folded note, not in Emily's handwriting. The moment his eyes hit the signature, his stomach clenched. Mary. He didn't even open the drive. He paced the room muttering to himself, panic crawling up his throat. When he finally sat down, he plugged the flash drive into his laptop with trembling hands. It only took a few clicks. The folder popped up. Truth. He opened it. And there he was. His words, his voice, his shame. Every careless message, every offhand comment, every time he had reduced me to a helper or someone who raised me instead of my mother. Words he thought would disappear into the digital ether now stared back at him like ghosts. He slammed the laptop shut, furious, but the silence that followed was deafening. He called Emily. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. By midnight, the dread inside him had hardened into something colder, something that couldn't be undone with flowers or charm. He opened his phone and tried to delete messages, to scrub the past, but the damage was done, and Emily was gone. She didn't scream when she left. She didn't even leave a note, just a missing suitcase and a half-empty closet. Daniel sat in the darkness, surrounded by everything he had fought to build, the apartment, the suits, the curated life, and for the first time, it felt hollow, fragile. He picked up the phone and stared at my number. He didn't call. Instead, he lay back on the couch and stared at the ceiling, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly and how long it would take to piece it back together. Meanwhile, I wasn't thinking about Daniel. I was on the phone with Emily. She had called me again the next morning. I walked away, she said. I couldn't be married to someone who builds his life on lies. I'm sorry you had to go through that, I said. No, she replied. I needed to see it. And now, I want to make sure you're never treated that way again. She asked to meet again, this time in her office, a bright, modern space in downtown Houston with high ceilings, glass walls, and a view of the skyline. I walked in feeling nervous, but Emily met me with a hug, a real one. I've been thinking, she said, gesturing toward the sleek chairs across from her desk. My company, we've been expanding. We need someone grounded, experienced, with real leadership potential. Someone like you. I blinked. Me? She smiled. You've led a life most people couldn't survive. You've managed people, budgets, schedules, and raised a son who graduated with honors. You know how to work, and you know how to lead. I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. Let me train you, she said. Let me invest in you the way you invested in him. I nodded, overwhelmed, not just by the opportunity, but by being seen, by being chosen, not out of pity, but because someone finally recognized my worth. That week I began the process of onboarding. The process. I shadowed meetings, learned new systems, adapted quickly, and something in me awakened, a sharpness I thought had dulled with time, a part of me that had been buried under years of sacrifice, now rising to the surface. As for Daniel, he showed up at my apartment 2 weeks later, not to apologize, to demand answers. Why would you do that? He snapped, standing in my doorway like he still had a place there. You ruined everything. I didn't flinch. No, I said calmly. You did that all by yourself. You had no right. I had every right, I replied. I bought the rings. I raised you. I gave you everything. And you erased me. He scoffed, looked around my apartment like it was beneath him. So this is what it's about? Revenge? I stepped forward. No, I said. It's about respect, something you stopped giving me a long time ago. He didn't respond, just stood there, fists clenched, like a child who'd lost control of his own game. I'm building something now, I added. Something for me. You don't have to understand it, but you don't get to sabotage it either. He turned and walked away. Not a goodbye, not even a backward glance. And for the first time, I didn't care, because I finally understood something. Some people only come around when they need something. But the ones who see you, the ones who stay, they don't need anything at all. They just recognize your light. The first time I walked into the executive offices of Emily's company, I felt like I had stepped into another world. Glass doors opened with a whisper. The floors shined like polished stone. Everything smelled like citrus and confidence. I clutched my worn leather bag a little tighter, feeling out of place but trying not to show it. Emily met me in the lobby, her smile warm and reassuring. Come on, she said, leading me past rows of desks, sleek computers, and young professionals in tailored clothes. This, I started, glancing around. isn't where I thought I'd end up." She turned to me, her voice soft but firm. "It's exactly where you're supposed to be." Over the next few weeks, Emily kept her promise. She didn't just hand me a job, she mentored me. She sat with me through onboarding sessions, introduced me to the leadership team, and placed me in charge of operations for a new community outreach initiative. My background, my instincts, the way I could see what needed fixing, suddenly it all had value. I wasn't the invisible woman in the background anymore. People listened when I spoke. They looked me in the eye. They respected me. It was strange at first, being acknowledged, being heard. After years of shrinking myself to fit into Daniel's world, I had forgotten what it felt like to take up space. And Emily? She didn't just see my potential, she celebrated it. "You know what I think?" she said during a late meeting one evening, as we reviewed program numbers and community feedback. "I think you've been leading your whole life. You just never had a title for it." That stuck with me. I started showing up in tailored clothes Emily had gifted me after our first week. "Nothing fancy," she said, handing me the box. "Just a few things that match the woman I see." I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in years, I didn't see a tired maid or a forgotten mother. I saw a woman with power, with history, with presence. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was unraveling. Emily didn't speak of him often, but I heard things, whispers from mutual acquaintances, updates through mutual contacts. After the separation, his employer started looking into internal complaints. Turns out, Daniel's need to project a perfect image wasn't just personal. It had bled into his professional life too. Ethical concerns, misrepresentation, quiet HR meetings that led to quiet consequences. He lost his job, moved out of his high-rise apartment, ended up renting a room in someone's basement on the outskirts of town. Emily never gloated. She never used it to hurt him. That wasn't who she was. But me? I won't lie. There was a part of me that felt vindicated, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because life had a way of teaching the lessons we refused to learn. And Daniel? He had built his entire identity on a lie, one he maintained by pushing me into the shadows. Now, without the money, the job, or the marriage, he had no one to blame but himself. I didn't hear from him directly. No apology, no explanation. But I didn't need one anymore. I was growing into someone else, someone I had always been, but never allowed myself to become. One afternoon, Emily invited me to join a panel at a women's leadership conference. I was nervous, unsure of what I could possibly say to inspire anyone, but she believed in me. "I want them to hear your story," she said. "The real one." So I said yes. I stood on a stage in a simple navy dress, holding the microphone with shaking hands, and I told the truth about raising a child alone, about cleaning houses for people who never looked me in the eye, about giving and giving, only to be forgotten, and then about finding something I didn't even know I had: power, worth, my own voice. The room was silent when I finished. Then the applause began, and I realized something that night. You don't need a spotlight to shine. Sometimes you just need someone to tell you it's okay to stop hiding. And finally, I wasn't hiding anymore. It was strange how the world could turn in silence. No explosions, no big announcements. Just small shifts, one door closing, another quietly unlocking somewhere else. That's how I learned Daniel had lost his job. I didn't hear it from him. I heard it from a former neighbor who still kept in touch, a woman I used to help with laundry when her back went out. She called one evening to chat, and in the middle of telling me about her granddaughter's graduation, she casually mentioned, "Oh, and your son. I heard he's not working anymore. Something about some issues at the firm." I didn't react at first. I just nodded and hummed politely. But after we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring, thinking. It wasn't joy I felt. It wasn't sadness either. It was something colder, something still. He had built his entire identity around escaping the life I gave him, clawing his way up with charm and image and calculated distance. But when the curtain fell and the illusion collapsed, he was left with nothing but the truth he had tried so hard to hide. And that truth was me. I found out later he had moved into a friend's garage apartment. Not even a proper lease, just a favor. Someone doing for him what I had done for years. He had reached the part of the story where pride starts to taste like rust. I didn't reach out, not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say. I had reached a different part of my journey. Emily's mentorship turned into a true partnership. I was overseeing operations now, managing teams, streamlining systems, even designing a new initiative to connect underprivileged women to professional mentorships. Every step I took forward, I left behind one more piece of the woman I used to be, the one who waited, hoped, stayed small. But I didn't erase her. I honored her. She was the reason I had survived. I moved into a new place, not flashy, not enormous, but clean and bright and mine, with a garden. I planted sunflowers along the fence line, big, bold flowers that stretched toward the sky without apology, just like I was learning to do. Then one day, I got a message. Not from Daniel, from one of his old colleagues. It was short. I know this is personal, but he talks about you, now, a lot. Says he messed up. Says he didn't see what he had. I didn't reply. I just sat there, wondering how long it would take for the words to come from him instead of someone else. Weeks passed. The emails from the mentorship program flooded in. Stories of women who found jobs, started businesses, rebuilt their lives. Every time I read one, I saw a little bit of myself in their journey. At night, I would sometimes think of Daniel, where he slept, what he ate, what he told himself to get through each day. I wondered if he missed the sound of my voice, if he regretted the way he used to flinch when I showed up in public places, the way he lowered his voice when saying I cleaned houses for a living. It wasn't pity I felt. It was distance, the kind that only comes after years of carrying a weight alone, and finally deciding to set it down. And then, one afternoon, I got a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. No delivery, no appointment. When I opened it, I froze. There he was, Daniel. Thinner, paler, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes tired. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at me like he wasn't sure I was real. I didn't move, I didn't speak. And then, finally, his voice broke through the silence. "Hi, Mom." It was the first time in years I'd heard him say it without hesitation. But I didn't let him in. Not yet. Because forgiveness isn't a doorway you walk through. It's a journey. And mine had only just begun. He stood on my porch like a boy again. Not the man he had become or the man he tried so hard to be. There was no designer suit, no perfect posture. Just Daniel, stripped down by life, by truth, by consequence. "Hi, Mom," he said again. His voice softer this time, the word Mom lingering like a question he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. I held his gaze for a long moment. Then, with measured calm, I said, "You should go." His face twitched. Confusion. Maybe disbelief. He hadn't expected that. He probably thought the door would swing open and I'd welcome him back with open arms, that I'd fix it all, like I always had. "Please," he whispered, "just let me talk." "I heard enough when you didn't let me talk," I said. "You've had years to call me that, call me. And now you show up because your life fell apart?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I raised a hand. "I'm not doing this on the porch," I said, not unkindly. "And not today." He nodded slowly. "Okay, I'm sorry." I closed the door gently. And for once, I didn't cry afterward. Instead, I turned on the radio, brewed a cup of tea, and sat at my desk, reviewing proposals for a new partnership Emily had connected me to, a national nonprofit supporting older women re-entering the workforce. They wanted me to lead a regional program. Me, the woman who once begged strangers to let her clean their houses just so her son could have a future. Now I was being invited to help reshape other women's futures. The first time I told my story in public, it felt like ripping open a scar. I was on stage, under soft lights, in front of an auditorium full of strangers. My palms were sweating. My heart pounded. But as I spoke, about raising a son alone, about working invisible jobs, about being erased, the crowd grew still. And when I finished, they stood up, applauded, some even cried. Not because my story was unique, but because it wasn't. There were so many Marys out there, so many women who had given their lives for others and been forgotten in the process. So I kept speaking. I kept showing up. Podcasts, panels, webinars. My inbox overflowed with messages from women saying, "You reminded me who I am." I never spoke Daniel's name, not out of spite, out of choice, because this story was mine now. And slowly, something incredible happened. I became known. Not as someone's mother, not as someone's employee, as me. One afternoon, I was invited to give a keynote at a women's summit in Dallas. Hundreds of attendees, cameras, lights. I wore a dark green dress, simple jewelry, my hair pinned back. I stepped onto that stage, looked out at the sea of women, young, old, in between, and I told the truth. My name is Mary Thompson, I said, and for most of my life, I believed I didn't matter unless I was helping someone else shine. But the truth is, we all deserve to shine, not just behind the scenes, not just when someone allows us to, but boldly, loudly, on our own. The applause was thunderous. And then, as I walked off stage, I caught a glimpse of someone standing near the back of the room. Daniel. He wasn't close. He hadn't tried to approach me. He just stood there watching, his face unreadable. But his eyes, they weren't filled with arrogance anymore, or shame, just something quieter, something closer to recognition. He slipped away before I could speak to him. But that was enough, because for the first time I wasn't chasing him. I was walking forward, and this time, he was the one following me. He came back 1 week later. This time, he knocked gently, like someone asking permission. I opened the door. We stood in silence, two shadows of a family that used to exist. He looked thinner than I remembered, older too. Or maybe it was just the weight he carried now, the kind of weight that doesn't sit on your shoulders, but on your soul. "Can I come in?" he asked. I didn't say yes, but I stepped aside. He sat on the couch where he used to do homework, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. I sat across from him, waiting. He took a breath, let it out slow. "I don't know how to start this," he said. "Then just say the truth," I replied. He nodded, eyes low. "I was embarrassed," he admitted. "Not of you, of myself, of how we grew up, of never having enough. I thought, if I pretended it didn't happen, I could finally belong somewhere else." His voice cracked. "And in trying to escape all of that, I erased you, the person who gave me everything." I didn't speak. "I told myself it was for your protection," he continued. "That if Emily's family didn't know the details, they wouldn't judge you. But that wasn't true. I wasn't protecting you. I was protecting myself." Tears gathered in his eyes, but he blinked them away. "You didn't deserve that, any of it." My throat tightened. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he said them, like a man finally coming clean to himself. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly, "but I needed you to know. I see what I did, and I'm sorry for all of it." I looked at him for a long time. This was the boy I raised, the one who used to fall asleep beside me on the bus after school, clutching his backpack like it held the whole world, the one who used to write me notes that said, "You're the best mom ever." And now here he was, broken, remorseful, uncertain, a boy again, but also, finally, a man. "I never stopped loving you," I said, "even when you tried to erase me, even when it broke me." He looked up, his eyes red. "Then why didn't you reach out?" I leaned back, folded my hands. "Because I finally learned that love doesn't mean losing yourself," I said. "I had to choose me, for once." He nodded slowly. "I understand that now." I got up, walked over to the small bookshelf by the window. I pulled out a photo, one of us from years ago, him in middle school, grinning, his arm slung over my shoulder. "You forgot who you came from," I said, handing it to him. But I didn't. He held the photo like it might shatter. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, his voice small. I sat beside him, my tone steady. "You don't fix it. You live with it. You carry it. And you do better." He nodded, unable to speak. We sat in silence, not the painful kind, the kind that heals. As the light from the window shifted across the room, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for anything. The apology I thought I'd never hear had come. And it didn't change the past, but it softened something sharp inside me. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant I was free. He stood to leave. I didn't hug him. I didn't tell him to stay, but I walked him to the door. And before he left, he looked back. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. "I wish I had said that sooner." I nodded. "You'll have to live with that too." And then he was gone, and I stood in my quiet apartment, feeling more whole than I ever had. Not because he came back, but because I didn't need him to. The envelope was light in my hands, just one sheet of paper inside. I wrote it the way I wrote everything these days. Slowly, deliberately, without apology. No anger, no need for response, just truth. I sealed it, wrote his name on the front, and mailed it that afternoon. No return address. I didn't need one. Inside, I had written, I always stood right in front of you. You just chose not to see me, but I saw you. All of you. I saw the scared little boy trying to fit in, the man trying to outrun his past. You buried me under shame, but I grew anyway. I forgave you long before you asked, not because you earned it, but because I needed to be free. I'll always love you. But now, I love myself too. You'll have to find your own way back. I'll be here when you do. Mary, I didn't expect an answer, and I didn't need one. The months that followed were full, not busy, full. Every day brought something new. A workshop to lead, a story to listen to, a woman to mentor. I laughed more, cooked more, planted sunflowers again, but this time, in the front yard. I wanted the world to see them, tall, bright, unashamed. And then came the invitation. A national summit on women's empowerment. The keynote speaker had dropped out. They wanted me. I flew to New York, wore a navy blue suit that Emily had picked out for me, stood backstage as the crowd buzzed with anticipation. When they called my name, the applause rose like a wave. I stepped into the light. Hundreds of eyes watched me cross the stage. I took the mic, smiled, and began. My name is Mary Thompson. For most of my life, I believed love meant sacrifice. I thought being invisible was part of being a good mother, a good woman. But I was wrong. You don't have to disappear to matter. You don't have to suffer to be worthy. And you don't have to be silent to be respected. I told my story, every painful inch of it, the long hours, the broken dreams, the betrayal, the awakening. I spoke of how I stopped waiting to be chosen and chose myself. When I finished, the silence was thick with emotion. Then came the applause, not polite, thunderous. As I walked off stage, hands reached out to shake mine. Eyes filled with tears. Women whispered, "Thank you." That was my story too. You gave me hope. And then, in the crowd, near the very back, I saw him. Daniel. He wasn't dressed up. He didn't try to come forward. He just stood there, still, watching. Our eyes met. I didn't smile. He didn't wave. But in that quiet second, everything was said. He saw me. Truly. Finally. And I saw him. Not as a mistake, not as a wound, but as part of a journey that had brought me here. I turned and walked away from the stage, the lights warm on my shoulders. I was no longer the woman who waited in corners. I was no longer the mother begging to be recognized. I was Mary Thompson, and I had risen. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.